The rain had stopped just moments before the evening sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the quiet courtyard. In the center of it, under the shade of a neem tree, sat Hiraba Modi. She was small, her back slightly bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and full of life. She was shelling peas into a steel bowl, humming a tune she had carried in her heart for decades. It was here, in this peaceful corner of her home, that something unexpected was about to happen, something that would bring together the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, and one of the most influential tech leaders in the world, Sundar Pichai, in a way no one could have predicted. That day had been full of official meetings, media flashes, and tight schedules. Sundar Pichai was in India for a technology summit, and Narendra Modi had been with him for much of the day, discussing how technology could help rural communities. The two men had walked through busy halls, filled with reporters and experts, each moment carefully planned by a team of organizers. But as the last meeting ended, Modi did something unusual. He turned to Sundar and asked in a soft voice, "Would you like to meet my mother?" There was a pause. Sundar was taken aback. It wasn't in the schedule, and in his world, schedules were like maps. You followed them if you didn't want to get lost. But the warmth in Modi's eyes made him nod, almost without thinking. "I would be honored," he said. The car ride was quiet. Outside the window, the city lights slowly faded into the simpler sights of small shops, narrow streets, and children playing barefoot. Sundar, used to the tall glass buildings of Silicon Valley, felt a strange calm as they drove further from the city center. Modi didn't speak much, but every so often, Sundar noticed him looking out the window with a faint smile, as if these roads carried memories he didn't need to explain. When they arrived, there was no red carpet, no line of photographers, just a modest home, its walls painted in faded colors, with flower pots placed neatly by the entrance. As they stepped inside, the smell of fresh chapatis and cardamom tea filled the air. Hiraba looked up from her peas, her hands pausing mid-motion. "Beta," she said warmly, her voice carrying the weight of 100 family dinners and quiet prayers. Modi bent down and touched her feet, a gesture of respect, before sitting beside her. Sundar, unfamiliar with the custom, but sensing its importance, folded his hands and gave a small bow. Hiraba studied him for a moment. Her eyes softened, and she gestured for him to sit on the low stool next to her. "You must be tired from the journey," she said in Gujarati, her voice as gentle as the breeze. Sundar didn't understand the words, but he felt their kindness. Modi translated quietly, and Sundar smiled, nodding his thanks. He noticed how Hiraba's hands moved with ease as she continued to shell peas, each pod opening with a quiet snap. There was a rhythm to it, steady, patient, and unhurried, like someone who had learned long ago that life was not meant to be rushed. As they sat, Hiraba began to ask simple questions in her own language. Where was he from? Did he have a family? What work did he do? Modi translated, but Sundar found himself wishing he could understand her directly. Something about her tone made him feel like she wasn't just making conversations, she was trying to understand him. To see the person beyond the title. Then, something happened that Sundar would never forget. Modi excused himself to take a quick phone call, leaving Sundar and Hiraba alone. The room fell into a comfortable quiet, broken only by the soft patter of rain returning outside. Hiraba looked at him and spoke again, slowly, clearly, as if hoping the meaning would reach his heart, even if the words could not. And somehow, they did. He didn't know the vocabulary, but he recognized the kindness in her eyes, the curiosity in her smile, the warmth in her voice. When she handed him a handful of peas, he accepted them like a small gift. When Modi returned, Sundar surprised him. In careful practiced Gujarati, he said, "Thank you, Ma." Hiraba's face lit up. Her laugh was soft, but filled with pride, like a grandmother who had just heard her grandchild speak for the first time. Modi's eyebrows rose in surprise. Then he smiled, The kind of smile that wasn't for cameras or speeches. It was the smile of a son watching his mother be honored, in a way she deserved. That was the moment everything changed. The visit was no longer just a polite stop, it became a memory they would all carry forever. But what Sundar didn't know was that Hiraba had something to tell him, something that would stay with him long after he returned to his world of technology, in boardrooms. Something about humility, and how even the most powerful people in the world should never forget the value of simple kindness. The evening air had turned cooler, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth. A thin drizzle tapped against the tin roof above the veranda where they now sat. Hiraba had moved from her spot under the neem tree to a wooden chair, with Sundar seated across from her on a simple woven cat. Narendra Modi, having ended his call, sat between them, the warmth of home settling over the three like an invisible blanket. Sundar kept glancing at Hiraba, curious about her life, about what it meant to grow up in a time so different from his own. There was a deep calm in her presence, a quiet strength that was almost impossible to put into words. She looked at him the same way she might look at a grandson who had been away for too long, someone who belonged, even if he didn't realize it yet. After a few minutes of casual talk, Hiraba leaned slightly forward, her hands resting on her lap. She spoke in Gujarati, her voice soft, but carrying a weight that made both men listen closely. Modi began to translate, but she held up her hand gently, signaling that she wanted to speak slowly so Sundar could catch certain words on his own. "You work with machines," she began, pointing at him, "but never forget. The best machine is here." She tapped her chest over her heart. Sundar nodded, unsure if he was supposed to respond yet. She continued, her gaze fixed on him in a way that felt almost like she was looking into the core of him. "When I was young," she said, "we had nothing. Not enough food, not enough light. But we had people who cared, and that was enough to keep going. Even the smallest kindness became a big thing when life was hard." Modi translated the words, but Sundar barely needed them. He felt the meaning, even before hearing it, in English. Hiraba's hands moved as she spoke, weaving invisible threads in the air, tying her story to his own, without either of them saying it aloud. "Today," she went on, "people have so much, but they forget to look at each other. They look at screens, not faces. They speak with words, but not with heart. If you want to make a real change, Beta, make people remember how to see each other again." There was a pause, and in that silence, Sundar felt the truth of what she said settle deep inside him. He thought about the world he lived in, about meetings filled with data and projections, about decisions made in glass towers far away from the people they affected. And he realized that for all his success, there was still something simple and human he could bring back into his work. Narendra. Modi was smiling quietly, watching the exchange with a kind of satisfaction only a son could feel. He knew his mother's words had found their mark then. Almost as if to lighten the mood, Hiraba stood and walked to the small kitchen. She returned with 2 steaming cups of tea and a plate of warm snacks. She handed 1 cup to Sundar, and he noticed how her hands, though wrinkled and marked by time, were steady and sure. "Drink," she said with a smile. "It will warm you before you leave." Sundar took a sip. It was sweet, spiced, and comforting in a way that made him think of home, even though this wasn't his home. He set the cup down carefully, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. They talked for a little longer, but Sundar knew the heart of their meeting had already happened. It was in the moment she told him that kindness was more powerful than any technology. It was in the way she made him feel like a person, not just a title. As the night grew darker, Sundar checked his watch reluctantly. His team was waiting for him, and there were still events scheduled for the next day. But when he stood to leave, Hiraba reached out and held his hand for a moment. "Beta," she said softly, "wherever you go, take people's hearts with you, not just their names." Sundar didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, feeling the words settle into his memory, and as they walked back to the car, Narendra Modi noticed something different in him. There was a quiet reflection in Sundar's eyes, the kind of look a man gets when something in him has shifted. They drove away in silence, the rain still falling lightly, but inside Sundar's mind, her voice echoed over and over. 2 weeks had passed since that evening in the quiet courtyard, but Sundar still carried it with him. He had returned to the fast-moving world of meetings, presentations, and endless flights, yet the memory of Hiraba's voice stayed sharp in his mind. It wasn't just the words, though, they had been powerful. It was the way she said them, with a kind of certainty that didn't need to be proven. Take people's hearts with you, not just their names. The sentence would come to him in quiet moments, sometimes even in the middle of a busy discussion, and it would make him pause before speaking. Now, he was sitting in his office, high above the city skyline, the glass walls framing a view of clouds drifting lazily past. The desk in front of him was covered with reports and charts, each one outlining the future of a project that had been months in the making. The project was bold. It aimed to replace older, smaller internet centers in rural India with large automated hubs run by advanced systems. On paper, it was efficient and profitable, but in the back of Sundar's mind, something about it felt cold. His senior team was waiting for his approval to move forward. All he had to do was sign the papers, and construction would begin in multiple states. But as his pen hovered over the document, he remembered Hiraba's hands passing him that steaming cup of tea, the way she had said that people look at screens, not faces. And suddenly, he saw it clearly. If this project moved ahead exactly as planned, many of the small community-run centers would close. Those centers weren't perfect, but they were places where people gathered, not just to use technology, but to talk, to share news, to ask for help. He put the pen down and leaned back in his chair. One of his assistants, noticing his hesitation, stepped in and asked softly, "Sir, is there an issue with the plan?" "Yes," Sundar said, after a long pause, "there is." Later that evening, instead of sending an email, he called an emergency meeting. His senior managers looked surprised when he began speaking about community bonds, about trust, about the importance of human presence. Some of them nodded slowly, while others exchanged glances, unsure of where he was going with this. "Technology can do many things," Sundar said, "but it cannot replace the feeling of being known by the people around you. We are not here only to make things faster, we are here to make them better for people's lives." He proposed a change. Instead of replacing the smaller centers, they would upgrade them. They would train local teams, give them better tools, and keep the human connection alive. The automated hubs could still be built, but they would support, not erase, the places where people met face to face. There was a moment of silence in the room. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The plan would take more effort, more time, and probably less profit in the short term. But Sundar knew it was the right choice. Later that night, when he finally had a moment alone, he thought about calling Modi to tell him, but he didn't. Instead, he imagined Hiraba hearing about it somehow, maybe from her son, and smiling the way she had that evening under the neem tree. The next morning, he boarded a flight to another country. But somewhere deep inside, he carried the sense that this decision was only the beginning, because life has a way of testing the lessons you think you've already learned on. His test was coming much sooner than he expected. It was late afternoon when Sundar's phone buzzed with a message from one of his closest colleagues. It was marked urgent. The message said there had been a major connectivity failure in a remote village in Gujarat. The outage had cut off internet, access to schools, small businesses, and even the local health clinic. The situation was growing worse by the hour, and because it was an area that had just begun using upgraded community-run centers, the responsibility now rested on Sundar's team. Sundar felt a knot in his stomach. In his world, delays and breakdowns were common, but this was different. This was one of the very communities he had fought to keep alive after remembering Hiraba's words. If they failed now, it would send the wrong message that keeping people involved was a weakness instead of a strength. He canceled his next 2 meetings and ordered his travel team to prepare a quick route. His assistants suggested he could monitor the repair from his office, but Sundar shook his head. "Some things you need to see with your own eyes," he said quietly. 2 flights and a long car ride later, Sundar arrived in the village just before sunset. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, and the narrow lanes were filled with curious faces as people noticed the unexpected visitors. He was dressed simply, without the formal suit that people often expected from him. The small internet center was dimly lit by a backup generator. Inside, a young man was frantically trying to fix the main system, while 3 children stood nearby, clutching their school notebooks, waiting for a chance to use the computers. Sundar walked in and introduced himself, not as a CEO, but simply as someone here to help. The young man looked startled, then relieved. "Sir, we've never had this problem before," he explained, "but the new connection points we installed last week, they're not holding the signal." Without thinking twice, Sundar rolled up his sleeves and began to work alongside him. He wasn't an engineer anymore. His hands were used to signing documents, not opening network boxes, but the years of solving problems in his early career came back like muscle memory. The 2 of them worked for hours, with villagers coming in and out, offering water, tea, and encouraging words. At one point, an older woman came and placed a small plate of snacks near Sundar. He looked up, and for a moment, he thought of Hiraba. The same warmth, the same unspoken care. It took until midnight, but finally, the signal returned. The screens lit up, and a cheer went up from the small crowd that had gathered. The children rushed to log in, their faces glowing in the flicker of the screens. Sundar could have left then, but instead, he stayed to talk to the villagers. He listened as they explained how the center had become more than a place for internet. It was where farmers checked market prices, students applied for scholarships, and families connected with relatives far away. As he listened, he realized something. If he had gone ahead with the original automated hub plan, this place would not exist. These people would not be here, sharing their stories, before leaving. The village elder came forward, holding a small cloth bag. Inside was a simple hand-woven scarf. "For you," the elder said, "to remember that we are more than numbers on a screen." Sundar accepted it with both hands, feeling the rough texture between his fingers, and that was when he understood this was not just a test of technology. It was a test of whether he truly believed in what Hiraba had told him, and he had passed. The morning after he returned from the village, Sundar was still carrying the scarf the elder had given him. It lay folded neatly on his desk, its deep red threads catching the light whenever the sun shifted through his office window. He was answering emails when his phone rang with a number he recognized immediately. Narendra Modi. "Sundar." Modi's voice was calm, but there was an undertone of urgency. "I need your help. And it's not about technology alone." Sundar straightened in his chair. Modi didn't usually call without notice unless it was something personal or serious. "Tell me," he said simply. There was a pause before Modi continued. "There is a small town in Gujarat, not far from my mother's village. They've been hit by heavy rains. The roads are damaged, power is out, and the local school, the only one in the area, has lost all of its records and digital equipment. The students are supposed to sit for their final exams next week. Without those records and working systems, they can't proceed." Sundar felt a sharp pull in his chest. He could hear in Modi's voice that this wasn't just a request, it was a plea for the futures of those children. "I can send a team," Sundar said. "I don't want just a team," Modi replied. "I want you. You've seen what it means when someone shows up in person. This is one of those times. The line was silent for a moment. Sundar glanced at the scarf, and he knew his answer before he spoke it. I'll be there. 2 days. Later, Sundar arrived in the rain-soaked town. The streets were muddy, and people moved cautiously along broken pathways. The school building was small, with walls stained from years of monsoons, and children stood in the doorway, watching as he approached. The principal, a tired but determined woman, greeted him. Sir, we've tried to recover the files, but the water destroyed the systems. We can't even print hall tickets for the exams. Sundar walked through the classrooms, seeing damp books stacked on desks, and computers with black screens. In one corner, a little girl was crying softly while her friend tried to comfort her. He stopped and knelt beside them. What's wrong? He asked gently. The older girl explained. Her brother was supposed to take his exam this year so he could go to college. But now, maybe he won't. The words hit Sundar hard. This was exactly what Hiraba had meant, how the smallest kindness could change the biggest outcomes. He got to work immediately. Using his contacts, he arranged for portable servers and offline systems to be flown in overnight. He stayed late into the night with local volunteers, setting up the equipment and drying out salvageable files. Every time he felt the weight of exhaustion, he remembered the look on the children's faces. By the next morning, the school's network was partially restored, and the lost records were rebuilt from backups in distant servers. The exams could go ahead. The principal's voice trembled as she thanked him. But Sundar only smiled and said, it was not just MIT, it was all of us here together. Before leaving, he stepped outside and saw a group of students gathered under a tree, whispering excitedly. One of them shyly stepped forward and handed him a small folded paper. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were just 3 words in Gujarati. Thank you, uncle. He held the note for a long moment, feeling something shift deep inside him, but before he could even return home, another message came from Modi. This one about Hiraba herself, and it would pull Sundar back to the place where it had all begun. Sundar, he said, Ma has not been feeling well. The doctors say she is stable, but she is asking for you. She says there is something she wants to tell you before she rests. Sundar froze for a moment, standing in the narrow aisle of the plane. He didn't even think twice. He stepped back, told the airline staff he would take a later flight, and was in a car headed toward Hiraba's village within the hour. The drive felt longer this time. The sky was a pale gold as the sun began to sink, and the roads were quiet except for the occasional cyclist passing by. Sundar's mind replayed every moment he had spent with her under that neem tree, every word she had spoken, every smile she had given. When he arrived, Modi was waiting outside the house. They exchanged a silent nod, and Modi led him inside. Hiraba was sitting on her cot, propped up by pillows, a light blanket around her shoulders. Though she looked tired, her eyes were as sharp as ever. When she saw Sundar, she smiled and motioned for him to sit close. Beta, she began in Gujarati, her voice soft but steady. You have done what many people forget to do. You have listened. Sundar leaned in, his eyes fixed on hers. I heard about the village you helped, about the school you saved, she continued. Those things, they are not just acts, they are seeds. One day, you will not be here to see the tree grow, but it will grow because you planted it. He felt his throat tighten. Ma, he said quietly, I only did what you taught me. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. And that is why I called you. I wanted to thank you. In my own way. Then, to his surprise, she reached beside her and brought out a small, folded handkerchief. It was worn, the edges frayed, but it was clean and neatly pressed. This was my mother's, she said, placing it in his hands. She gave it to me when I left home as a young bride, and she told me, whenever you hold this, remember where you came from. And remember to be kind, even when no one is looking. Now I give it to you. Sundar held it carefully, as if it were made of something far more delicate than cloth. He couldn't find the right words, so he simply bowed his head. "You will go far, Beta," she said. "But no matter how far, speak to people in their own language, not just with words, but with the heart. That is how you will change the world." Outside, the wind rustled through the neem leaves, the same tree under which they had first met. As the evening deepened, Sundar stayed by her side, talking softly with her and Modi. When it was time to leave, he touched her feet in respect once more. She blessed him, her fingers light on his head, and smiled that warm smile he would never forget. On the way back, Modi glanced at him and said, "You know, when you thanked her in her own language that day, you gave her one of the happiest moments of her life." Sundar looked out at the road ahead, the folded handkerchief still in his palm, and thought about how small gestures could shape entire lives. And in that moment, he promised himself that no matter how high his work took him, he would always come back to the ground, to people, to kindness, to the language of the heart. Months passed, but the rhythm of life did not slow for Sundar. He was traveling from one country to another, meeting leaders, engineers, students, and dreamers. Every stage he stood on, every room he entered, carried the weight of big expectations. But no matter how important the event, his mind often wandered back to the quiet courtyard, the neem tree, and the voice of Hiraba telling him to speak to people in their own language, not just with words, but with the heart. One afternoon, he received an invitation to speak at a global education summit in Delhi. It was one of the largest gatherings of its kind, attended by leaders from around the world. The organizers wanted him to share his vision for the future of technology in education. Sundar agreed, but this time, he decided his speech would be different. When the day came, the large conference hall was packed. Screens displayed his name in bold letters, and cameras streamed the event live to millions of viewers. Sundar walked to the podium, holding the small folded handkerchief Hiraba had given him inside his jacket pocket. He began by talking about technology, how it could open doors for learning, how it could connect people across distances. But then he paused, letting the silence settle over the room. "I want to tell you a story," he said, his voice steady but warm. "It is about a woman in a small village in Gujarat. She is not a teacher by profession, but she has taught me lessons that have shaped my life. She told me that no matter how advanced our machines become, the best machine will always be here." He placed his hand over his heart. He spoke of the day he first met Hiraba, how she welcomed him like family, how she reminded him that kindness was as essential as innovation. He told them about the village where he repaired the network with his own hands, the school where children could take their exams because a community worked together. As he spoke, the audience grew still. Some leaned forward in their seats. Others nodded slowly, as if remembering moments in their own lives when a simple act had made all the difference. Then, as he reached the end of his speech, Sundar switched languages. He spoke directly in Gujarat, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Ma, wherever you are, thank you for teaching me to lead with the heart first." In the front row, Narendra Modi sat listening, a faint smile on his face. He knew those words were for his mother, but they were also for everyone listening, an invitation to see leadership as service, and success as responsibility. When Sundar stepped down from the stage, the applause was long and genuine. It was not the kind of clapping that came from being impressed, it was the kind that came from being moved. After the event, a young teacher from a remote village approached him. "Sir," she said softly, "your words reminded me why I became a teacher. Sometimes we forget, but you made me remember." Sundar smiled and nodded, slipping his hand into his pocket and feeling the folded handkerchief. That night, as his car drove him past the quiet streets of Delhi, he looked out the window and thought about promises. He had made one to himself, the day he left Hiraba's home, to always return to the ground, to people, to kindness, and in that moment, he knew it was a promise he would keep, not just for the rest of his career, but for the rest of his life.